Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller with the National Weather Service. Thanks for tuning in to Alaska Weather. Let's get you started here with where you can find out some more information about your current forecast. You can go online at arh.noaa.gov, and that'll take you to all of Alaska, Juneau, Fairbanks, and Anchorage. Our weather info line is 24/7, 1-800-472-0391. And you can follow us on Facebook using NWS Alaska, on Twitter at NWS Alaska. Use the hashtag AKwx if you want to see what's going on around the entire state. And then you can find this show and a few other segments and other shows on YouTube later on using AKwx TV. So let's take a look at tonight's hazards map, and you can see it's not super active out there again, but we do still have plenty of wildfires going on throughout much of the interior, and with that we do have our dense smoke advisories in effect. This is for the central interior and the lower Koyukuk and middle Yukon valleys, and these are in effect until 12 p.m. 12 p.m. daylight time on Wednesday, and these are from the Fairbanks office, and they are for smoke reducing visibilities to 1 mile or less at times. So be advised if you're traveling in those areas. Obviously reduced air quality as well for folks that have any conditions for sensitivities to air quality. And that's really the only advisory we have to talk about. Our fire danger is slowly coming down as we have dropped the extreme from the map and now just see high fire danger. This mainly hugs the northern side of the Alaska Range here and stretches back into northwest Alaska towards the Seward Peninsula. And again, we do have several active wildfires up there from Aggie Creek and several other ones that are burning quite a few acres still at this time. So we do see this pattern helping the firefighters somewhat, but nonetheless, high fire danger remains in place. Let's take a look at the satellite loop now out over the Bering Sea and Western Pacific. As you can see, we do have our next area of activity that is starting to move from west to east throughout much of the Aleutian chain and towards Dutch Harbor. And with that, we do expect this system to become our primary weather maker over the next several days. High pressure over the western and central Bering, keeping things mostly clear on this satellite image. However, we do have a marine stratus layer that is hard to see on this particular satellite because of the temperatures, but there is quite a bit of low clouds and fog throughout much of the Bering. And then down further to the south, we do have a current typhoon that will eventually become a remnant typhoon as it moves into the northern Pacific. And as it does so, it will get entrained into our jet pattern. And with that, we'll see some effects probably later this weekend and maybe into next week. Let's take a look at this loop one more time. And again, here you can see the jet pretty active just south of the area, and it's starting to help to support this system here. And there's that typhoon spinning down there with a nice tight eye wall down over just south of Japan. Looking at visible satellite now, a little bit closer to the mainland, you can see plenty of showers and thunderstorms once again have fired over much of the interior and for much of south central Alaska. Just showers for the most part along the mountains. One of those passed through Anchorage just a few moments ago, dropping temperatures. We do have a fairly wide area of thunderstorms moving from east to west through western Canada, but for the most part that should stay confined to the east of the Alcan border. Some of the storms in the Fairbanks region could produce small hail and gusty winds up to about 35 miles an hour this afternoon, so be advised of those. All of these should have plenty of precipitation with them, so not expecting any dry thunderstorms or anything of that nature, but we do have plenty of showers out there. As we look towards southeast Alaska and watch the loop one more time, We do have one weak shortwave pushing some energy into the Gulf there, into the coast of southeast Alaska, and with that, some precipitation continues for many folks along the eastern portion of the Gulf, from Sitka down to Ketchikan. And here's our system that we'll address over the next couple of slides as we look at its building low pressure system just south of Unalaska Bay. And as that moves to the north and east, that's going to really take over our pattern here for the next several days. So for today's weather, again, we do have that fairly wide area of thunderstorms and showers stretching from the Alaska Range down towards the Talkeetna Mountains. Showers throughout south central, courtesy of this broad area of low pressure. And there's that smoke that we mentioned with the dense smoke advisories issued by the Fairbanks office. Some patchy fog along the western portions of the northwest coast, and that can be attributed to that high pressure that's off over the western Bering. Patchy fog also in place over the Pribilof Islands, keeping ceilings and visibilities in the MVFR category for aviation purposes. As we look towards southeast Alaska here, we can see that weak area of lower pressure, and that is starting to push farther to the south and east, and we'll see that slowly work its way out of southeast Alaska, helping the showers to diminish for those folks. And then down towards the central Aleutians, there's our 993 millibar low pressure system, and that will slowly bring some warm air and plenty of moisture. This will have a very deep moisture tap with it, and we expect that to bring plenty of moisture to the Aleutians and eventually to southwest and south central Alaska as we go through the week. Taking a look at tonight's forecast, there is that weak area of lower pressure in the upper levels starting to make its way further to the south and east. So again, the light rain will continue, but we should see that start to taper off as we go into Wednesday. Now for tonight's over the mainland, you can see that the thunderstorms have diminished and we just have some light showers mainly along the mountains, and we will see very much a repeat of that pattern as we go into Wednesday. Here's our low pressure system, slowly strengthening, but nothing terribly deep for this time of year, 991 millibars, but it does again have a very large surge of moisture coming with it. Then as we look towards the Bering, we do have that patchy fog continuing underneath that high pressure over the western Bering, and that will continue to keep marine stratus and patchy fog from many of the locations out there for mariners and for aviation purposes. Out over the Arctic coast, we do have clear skies for a change up there, and that will allow temperatures to be quite cool overnight. And we'll take a look at those here in just a few moments. Down now for our Wednesday forecast, down towards the central Aleutians, that area of low pressure has remained just about the same at about 993 millibars, but it is starting to push that precipitation a little bit closer to Kodiak Island on Wednesday. Showers and thunderstorms once again expected to fire along this area of lower pressure over much of the mainland, from the Talkeetna Mountains down over the Alaska Range, Kuskokwim Valley, and expect them just north of the Alaska Range as well for central interior locations. And the light rain should become more showery as we get into southeast Alaska on Wednesday, as we start to see a little bit of this high pressure building in. This is a very strong area of high pressure. It is slowly building over the eastern portion of the over the Gulf of Alaska. However, much of the calm and fair weather with this will stay south of our area. And then on into Thursday now, you can see that our area of rain has finally made its way into southwest and south central Alaska. This is when we expect the more moderate rainfall to make it into the eastern Kenai Peninsula, possibly areas like Seward and Homer. Could see quite a bit of rainfall. The upper level support for this system is very strong, and we don't expect it to be long-lived, but definitely Thursday into Thursday night and Friday looks to be quite wet for anyone planning on dip netting or anyone out over southwest Alaska. It should be a fairly significant rainmaker. Out over the central portion of the state, expect the showers to be the predominant thing. No thunderstorms south of the Alaska Range, and then up towards the Brooks Range will be where we find the thunderstorms on Thursday. And for southeast Alaska, again, a fairly calm day on Thursday as we see the front and all the energy associated with that well off to the west in the Gulf. Taking a look at temperatures now. You can see mainly over southeast Alaska, highs in the mid to upper 50s. Many places came in right about 57 degrees, 62 degrees at Skagway, and 58 degrees at Yakutat. Over towards Valdez, we saw 59 degrees, and Cordova was 60 degrees, 57 degrees there at Middleton, and South Central was mainly in the low 60s. As we look towards the interior, we saw a little bit cooler reporting at Fairbanks at 58 degrees this afternoon, and that was because of that heavy rainfall and those thunderstorms up there, dropping their temperature quite a bit with some cooler air coming down with the rain. Mid to upper 60s to lower 70s along the Brooks Range. And then as we get up towards the Arctic coast, expect it was 46 degrees this afternoon at 4 p.m. And 41 degrees at Barrow. Nome came in at 62 degrees, and out on the Seward Peninsula, 45 degrees, a little bit cooler along the water there. And as we look to the southwest Alaska and out over the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Range, we saw temperatures anywhere between the lower 60s, 60 degrees there at King Salmon, 65 at Bethel, and then stretching out towards the Pribilof Islands, 52 and 54, St. Paul and St. George. And we had temperatures in the low to mid 50s for much of the Aleutian chain until you got out to Dutch Harbor until you got out to Atka and Adak where it was in the upper 40s. Now taking a look at tonight's low temperatures, similar to last night, not a whole lot of change in this pattern yet for temperatures. We expect upper 40s to low 50s for southeast Alaska. And then for south central Alaska, again, mid to upper 40s for many of the areas along the coastal locations. We'll see closer to low 50s for those locations. Copper River Basin, upper 40s. And along the Brooks Range and central interior, anywhere from the mid to upper 50s, even low 60s in some spots. North of the Brooks Range, we see anywhere between the mid to upper 30s, even some low 40s up there where we have those clearing skies. And then southwest Alaska, tonight's temperatures will be in the mid to upper 40s. As we get out towards the Aleutian Range, expect upper 40s for many locations out there and mid 40s as you get towards the central Aleutians. For tomorrow's high temperatures, very similar again to today, maybe a few degrees warmer towards southeast Alaska where we'll see the sunshine start to break out later in the day, anywhere from the upper 50s to the low 60s. South central Alaska can expect another day in the low to mid 60s. Our average temperature has been remaining well above normal for the past several days because of our warm nights with all this moisture in place. And over the interior, anywhere between the low to mid 60s. Over the Brooks Range, that's where we'll have our most sunshine early in the day, and they'll climb up into the mid to upper 70s. Arctic coast will be around mid 40s to low 50s, and southwest Alaska will be in the low to mid 60s. For the Aleutian chain, expect anything from the mid 50s to upper 50s and low 50s for the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at flying weather now, as you can see here on this map, we do expect thunderstorms once again to fire over the interior tomorrow afternoon, and that will produce pockets of IFR conditions, of course, gusty winds and gusty winds inside those thunderstorms with potential for hail as well. And then out over the Bering Sea, that's where we expect that frontal system to make the most IFR conditions, the most widespread IFR conditions, especially on the south side of the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. Small area of IFR also for southeast Alaska as that onshore flow continues to push moisture into the passageways. And taking a look at those passes now, Anaktuvuk Pass will be VFR tomorrow. Adigan will also be VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill will be VFR early and going to MVFR later in the day as we expect thunderstorms to once again fire in those areas. Rainy, similar conditions, VFR becoming MVFR due to thunderstorms. Windy, similar conditions there, VFR becoming MVFR with thunderstorms on the Alaska Range. Isabel will be VFR. Mantasta will be VFR. Tanita will be VFR. Portage also VFR. And Chilkoot and White Pass is going from instrument flight rules to marginal visual flight rules as we see things slowly clearing for southeast Alaska. Taking a look at freezing levels for tomorrow morning, we expect, again, fairly warm conditions. The 6,000 foot line is not until you get up north of the Arctic coast. We do have a pocket of that lower, colder air centered right around that area of low pressure that's been over the Gulf of Alaska the last several days. 6,000 foot freezing levels there. And then over the mainland, mainly about 8,000 feet. With that next system coming up, we do see freezing levels jumping up from 8,000 to 10,000 feet south of the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula. As we take a look at icing for tomorrow, we do expect that frontal system to bring up some light to isolated moderate. With that warm air, it should be pretty high up in the atmosphere at about 8,000 feet. Around the backside of it, where some of that colder air from the Bering is pulled down, we do expect it to be light to isolated moderate above 6,000 feet. And taking a look at the jet stream now, we see it coming into our area at about 80 knots, the polar jet, and diving down, supporting this area of low pressure at about 100 knots. This is what we call a coupled jet, where it combines two different areas of energy combining into one area of energy, and that's what's helping this system to develop a little bit more intensely. We do have about 100 knots just to the southeast of that area of low pressure. And then that climbs over a weak ridge in the Gulf of Alaska at 95 knots, and then supports this low over western Canada. Weak area of low pressure way off towards Hudson Bay as well. Taking a look at the 9,000 foot winds now, again, this area of low pressure is the primary focal point for the winds on this map. As you can see, southwest becoming southeast very quickly here towards Kodiak Island and the eastern Aleutians. At about 35 knots is where our winds are going to peak at 9,000 feet. towards the rest of the Gulf of Alaska and on into the mainland, southwest becoming southeast, and then again southwesterly to westerly, anywhere between 35 knots becoming 20, and eventually down to 10 knots over the mainland. Fairly calm winds still over the mainland. As you get into southeast Alaska, expect westerly flow 10 to 15 knots, unless you're down towards the Dixon entrance, where it'll be about 20 knots. For 3,000-foot winds, again, this area of low pressure is our primary driving force here. 35 knots coming around this area of low pressure in counterclockwise fashion and becoming about 30 knots just north of that area. High pressure over the western Bering is giving us anticyclonic flow, 10 knots becoming 15 knots out of the northeast. And over mainland, we do see winds again out of the southwest to west, fairly light, 5 to 10 knots at 3,000 feet. And for turbulence, we expect areas of light, isolated, moderate below 8,000 feet. And just right along the area of the frontal boundary, we do have the possibility of some occasional widespread moderate, but that will be very patchy indeed. For the most part, it'll just be that light, isolated, moderate. Thanks for watching this portion of it. Stay with us, and we'll get back with your marine forecast.
We have a big solar flare coming in, so we're out here on an aurora hunt. It's a CME. It's dynamite, coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun, it kicks off energy in these explosions that are larger than the Earth, explosion type things coming off of sunspots. And if that energy is pointing straight at the Earth, it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that energy, electrons, come down our magnetic field, collide with oxygen up there about 50 or a couple hundred miles high, and that's what generates the northern lights. My job as the photographer and the aurora hunter is to be in position, you know, location, location, location. And I like to think I'm composing. Mother Nature, it's a bit of a teamwork thing, you know, she's got to put on the show, but I have to be in the right position and of course with the right tools and the know-how. I've stopped keeping track of how much time I spend out here in terms of hours. It's more in terms of weeks or months, or at this point years now. You know, it was always in me. Even when I was a kid growing up in the lower 48, I would spend nights sleeping on our trampoline, just staring at the stars. I'm in 4th grade and I'm going, wow, look at those stars. And I'd see how many nights in a row I could sleep on the trampoline. And I think my record was 23 nights in a row. So I was doing kind of strange things for an Iowa country boy. I can remember specifically the very first time I saw the Northern Lights. It was 1989, the peak of the solar cycle, and I was going to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming. And all of a sudden we had heard the Northern Lights were out. It's like, what are those? I'd never really seen them before. And my goodness gracious, we were on top of a mountain in the Laramie Range and they were turning blood red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the very first picture I took, that was 1990. Now, an old film camera, Pentax K1000 on a plastic Kmart tripod. Took 2 shots on slide film and got them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, this beautiful green thing swirling about. And from that moment, I was hooked. When I realized that you could preserve the auroras on film, I just experimented a ton. I'd had a heaping stack of slides, the no good ones. The experiments gone wrong, you know, too dark, fuzzy, out of focus, too light. I had this huge garbage can full of excess slide film, and that was just the learning curve. Well, when I go out here, it's all about getting the shot. And my wife and I, we've called it the hero shot. But the hero shot is the one where you just come home and you go, look at this. And everyone goes, wow, and you feel like a hero. It's a wonderful feeling, you know. It's good for the ego, of course. It's good for the business. But if you kind of strip that away, it's good for what's inside you, because that's really the hero moment in nature. And Mother Nature's putting on this show that is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. When I first resigned from my day job, that was in 1996, and decided I wanted to become a full-time aurora hunter, my goal from that moment and to this day still is to get one hero shot a year. I figured, and I'm talking the kind that somebody wants to buy from you and hang on their wall, where the auroras are extremely bright, very active, turning colors, where you can't believe your eyes. If you get to preserve a little sample of that with a photograph, well, it's what we call the hero shot. Wow, what a feeling. I mean, oh, you're elevated, levitating, you are lifted up. Your spirits are so high that I love that feeling. And I think I get that so much from seeing cool things in nature that I will go way out of my way to find that. And I can, you know, the next day, well, I'll be just laying there thinking about it and thinking how lucky I was, or how fortunate. Of course, I just, you know, spent 2 weeks sitting there staring at the sky and not seeing anything, so you got to remember that, you know, luck is kind of a relative term, but I still just feel incredibly lucky to be even in a position to where I could have been there, taken a photograph of it, and just mainly experienced it. Well, that feeling could last for days.
And welcome back. Hope you enjoyed this segment on the aurora. And let's get into your marine forecast now for Wednesday, southeast Alaska. You can expect southerly flow up towards Lynn Canal in the inner passageways, 15 knots becoming 25 knots, increasing through the day there in Lynn Canal, and 3 to 5 foot seas. Down towards Ketchikan, expect northwest winds, 15 knots, and seas about 3 feet. Out over the open waters, anywhere from west to south and southwest flow, 10 to 15 knots, fairly light, and 6 to 7 foot seas on Wednesday. On into Thursday, that southerly flow continues from Petersburg up towards Lynn Canal, and 10 to 20 knots, seas about 2 to 4 feet. Northwest flow as we get a little bit towards Dixon Entrance, and seas 2 feet, 10 knots winds. So it's the open waters then, south winds 10 knots, and seas about 6 feet, becoming southeasterly 15 to 20 knots, and seas about 5 feet for the northeastern portion of the Gulf. Out over for South Central on Wednesday, expect pretty calm conditions for Prince William Sound and the Cook Inlet. Variable winds at about 10 knots and seas 2 feet. For the open waters of the western portion of the Gulf, we expect southeast winds 10 to 15 knots and seas about 3 to 4 feet. And then down towards Kodiak Island, southeast winds 20 knots, seas about 6 feet. Towards the western Barrens and Shelikof, expect east and southeast flow 15 knots and seas will be between 3 and 4 feet. On into Thursday now, we have increasing winds and seas as that low pressure center moves up. Southeast and south winds all the way through the Gulf now at about 30 to 35 knots. Gale force winds for a few spots there in the eastern Barren Islands, and the western Barren Islands also expecting gale force winds. Seas building all the way to 10 feet there. And for the Cook Inlet, expect east and northeast winds 20 to 25 knots and seas about 4 feet. Low pressure will also impact the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday, but on Wednesday expect mainly just east and southeast flow, 20 to 25 knots, seas 6 to 7 feet south of the Alaska Peninsula and 3 to 4 feet north of the chain. And then on Thursday, there's where the south and southeast winds increase a little bit, 20 to 25 knots, and seas will really respond in accordance with that, 11 to 12 foot seas south of the chain with 4 to 5 feet north of the chain. For the Aleutians now, expect anywhere between east and northeast and then eventually becoming north over the western Aleutians, 20 to 25 knots and seas generally on the order of 6 to 7 feet. And then on Thursday, again responding to that area of low pressure, things swinging around a little bit more to the westerly direction, anywhere between 15 and 25 knots out of the west-northwest. And we do see seas between 5 and about 9 feet for much of the central Aleutians, 6 to 7 foot seas with a little bit more variable winds at about 20 knots. For the west coast of Alaska, expect north winds towards Gamble at about 15 knots and 3 foot seas. Variable here just along the Hooper Bay region and out towards the central Bering, 10 knots and about 2 to 3 foot seas. And then east to northeast winds towards the Pribilof Islands, 20 knots and 3 to 4 foot seas there as well. For Thursday, expect fairly light winds between 15 and 25 knots and out of the east and northeast, and seas will be generally between 3 and 6 feet. For the Arctic coast now, wrapping around the state mainly, east to northeast and then becoming north, 10 to 15 knots. Seas fairly low at 2 to 3 feet. And then on Thursday, expect those winds to increase just a little bit out of the east and again switching to the north as you get just west of north of the Seward Peninsula, and 20 knots becoming 15 knots for the northwestern portion of the state. Seas about 3 to 4 feet. So let's take a recap of tonight's weather. We do expect that smoke to continue to produce dense smoke conditions, and the advisories are in place from the Fairbanks office until noon on Wednesday for the lower Koyukuk, middle Yukon, and the central interior. And we do expect showers the thunderstorms to dissipate and just become showers over much of the mainland as we go into the overnight hours. Here's our area of low pressure that we'll be keeping an eye on as it starts to bring that area of rain to the north. And this area, southeast Alaska, of rain will become showers as we go into the day on Wednesday. Those will dissipate into showers. We'll see some thunderstorms over western Canada. Out towards the mainland, we do expect thunderstorms once again on Wednesday, but they should be less widespread. And some of these showers should help to clear that visibility a little bit, so those advisories are only in effect until noon on Wednesday. Here comes this area of low pressure again, not really strengthening a whole lot, but it is bringing a large surge of moisture. And that surge of moisture will make it into southwest Alaska and reach south central Alaska as we get into the day on Thursday. This will continue to spread north and east fairly quickly as we move into Friday and the end of the week as well. Thanks for watching the show this evening. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller. Hope you have a great night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.